A body stays healthy when change can occur without losing organization. Organization means functions start, stop, and transition on time. Organization means effort stays proportional to demand. Organization means recovery restores capacity instead of only reducing discomfort. When organization is strong, most people do not notice it. They notice only the activities they choose to do. When organization weakens, people begin managing themselves instead of living. They start budgeting energy hour by hour. They pre-plan rest like it is an appointment. They hesitate before simple tasks because tasks now have a cost. They can still perform, but performance feels like steering. This is the first practical meaning of Zang-Fu organization in daily life. It describes how the system keeps effort low while output stays stable. When this organization is compromised, the system compensates. Compensation is not failure. Compensation is how the body protects continuity. The problem is that compensation is expensive. Expense accumulates, and accumulation changes what the person can do next week, next month, and next season. A useful way to think is to separate 3 layers of everyday function. The first layer is adaptability. The second layer is recovery. The third layer is reserve. Adaptability is how quickly you can shift states without friction. Recovery is how completely you return to baseline after effort. Reserve is how much capacity you keep even when life stays demanding. Zang-Fu organization is the framework that keeps these 3 layers coherent. When people say they want practical learning, they usually want to understand these layers. They want to know why they can work but cannot unwind. They want to know why they can train but cannot recover. They want to know why they can sleep but still wake up depleted. Those are not mysterious problems. They are recognizable patterns of failed regulation over time. Not by memorizing symptoms, but by tracking how organization, compensation, and timing behave. A person can lose adaptability while still having reserve. A person can lose recovery while still looking functional. A person can lose reserve while still being driven by compensation. These stages look different, and they create different everyday experiences. If you can recognize the stage, you stop chasing surface signs. You begin asking what the system is doing to hold itself together. That is the practical value of Zang-Fu mechanics. It explains why the same lifestyle feels fine for years, then suddenly feels intolerable. It explains why small stressors start causing large reactions. It explains why rest stops working the way it used to. It also explains why quick fixes can backfire, because quick fixes often increase demand on a system that is already compensating. The aim is to learn what kind of change is safe at each stage, and what kind of change produces more fragmentation. Start with a simple everyday checkpoint. If the person's main complaint is that they cannot shift states, adaptability is failing. If the person's main complaint is that they cannot bounce back, recovery is failing. If the person's main complaint is that capacity is shrinking across months, reserve is failing. These checkpoints will be used repeatedly in the examples later. They let the viewer feel real traction without memorizing lists. They also keep the theory honest, because organization must show up as lived experience. The core mechanism of Zang-Fu organization can be described as regulation plus throughput. Regulation decides what is allowed, when, and how strongly. Throughput is the ongoing processing and movement that keeps life continuing. When regulation is strong, throughput can be smooth and efficient. When regulation weakens, throughput becomes either forced or chaotic. Forced throughput feels like pushing. Chaotic throughput feels like unstable swings. Both are costly. A practical marker of regulation is timing. Timing means activation rises when needed and drops when no longer needed. Timing means appetite matches true need rather than urgency. Timing means focus turns on and off without friction. Timing means sleep arrives naturally and completes its cycle. When timing fails, people try to replace regulation with control. Control is conscious management. Regulation is automatic coordination. Control can work for a while, but control always consumes attention and tension. That consumption is one way reserve gets spent. Another core mechanism is sequence. Few activity is sequential by nature. Processing happens step by step, not all at once. When sequence is clean, the person feels settled after eating, after working, and after training. When sequence is disrupted, the person feels carried forward. They feel like the day never fully resolves. They snack, scroll, or stimulate because the system does not land. This is not a moral issue. It is a regulation issue. A third mechanism is buffering. Zang regulation buffers variation. It prevents small changes from producing large oscillations. When buffering weakens, the person becomes sensitive. Small stress creates big activation. Small loss of sleep creates big fatigue. Small dietary deviation creates big discomfort. Sensitivity is often treated as the main problem. In many cases, sensitivity is the signal that buffering is gone. The correct question becomes what depleted the buffer. A fourth mechanism is availability. Availability is not the same as quantity. Resources can exist but be released at the wrong time. Mistimed availability produces the familiar pattern of wired nights and flat mornings, or strong mornings and crashes after midday, or random surges that do not match life demands. People often call this hormones, stress, or anxiety. Those words may describe the experience, but they do not explain the mechanism. The mechanism is that release is no longer regulated. When release is not regulated, the system compensates by forcing output. Forcing output can look like productivity, until forcing output becomes depletion. A fifth mechanism is distribution. Effort should distribute across systems instead of concentrating as tension. When distribution fails, certain channels of effort get overloaded. The person feels tight, driven, or mentally overloaded. They can still function, but the cost shows up as constant internal pressure. This pressure is not always pain. It can be the feeling that rest does not feel safe, or the feeling that if they stop, everything will fall apart. Those are practical signals of compensation dominating regulation. A sixth mechanism is closure. Closure means that after a cycle of work, eating, or training, the system completes the cycle. Completion feels like satisfaction and settling. When closure fails, the person keeps seeking a finish line. They stay hungry for completion. They keep doing more, or they keep distracting themselves. They may be exhausted and still unable to stop. This is one of the clearest lived signs of loss of internal organization. When the system cannot close cycles, it cannot recover. And when it cannot recover, reserve is spent. These mechanisms are not abstract. They can be observed in normal daily routines. The viewer does not need to memorize organs to track them. They can track timing, sequence, buffering, availability, distribution, and closure. Those 6 markers will guide reasoning in the next chapters. System interaction means that when one area takes strain, another area changes behavior to compensate. The body rarely solves problems by fixing one point. It solves problems by shifting load. This is why symptoms move, and why people get confused by changing presentations. In daily life, load often enters through 3 common gates: overactivation, under-recovery, and persistent throughput without closure. Overactivation is when the system stays on. It can be mental. It can be physical. It can be emotional. The key is that downshifting becomes difficult. When downshifting is difficult, the system borrows buffering from other domains. For example, a person may stop digesting comfortably when work becomes constant. Food did not change. The regulation around processing changed. The system diverted resources towards staying activated. Sequence and closure then degrade. Under recovery is when rest reduces discomfort but does not restore capacity. In this state, the person can still function with effort, but each day begins from a lower baseline. This creates a feedback loop because starting low makes the person force output. Forcing output increases activation. Activation further reduces recovery. Now the system is interacting with itself in a loop. Persistent throughput without closure is common in modern life. People eat on the move, work late, train hard, then attempt to unwind with stimulation. The day never fully lands. The system stays open. An open system cannot rebuild buffering, so sensitivity increases. Sensitivity then triggers more control strategies. More control increases tension. Tension further prevents closure. This is the lived experience of a self-reinforcing interaction loop. Another interaction pattern is trade-offs. The system may protect performance by sacrificing sleep, or protect mood by sacrificing digestion, or protect work output by sacrificing training recovery. The person experiences this as random problems, but it is usually one problem expressed through different trade-offs. Here is a concrete everyday example. A person increases work hours for a month. They feel fine at first. Then they notice late-night alertness. They start using screens or snacks to unwind. Sleep becomes lighter. In the morning, they feel foggy. They use caffeine. Caffeine helps output, but appetite and digestion become irregular. They begin craving quick fuel. Now the person thinks they have sleep problems, digestive problems, and focus problems. The interaction view sees one loop. Overactivation, reduced closure, reduced recovery. Reduced recovery, forced output. Forced output, increased activation. The loop tightened. Another example, a person starts training harder. They feel strong for 2 weeks. Then, recovery starts taking longer. They push anyway. Sleep becomes restless. They wake up early. They feel wired in the morning and flat in the afternoon. They increase stimulants. Now their system stays elevated. Digestive comfort declines. They become more sensitive to foods they used to tolerate. They think the problem is diet. The interaction view sees a recovery problem creating sensitivity. Under recovery, reduced buffering. Reduced buffering increased sensitivity. Sensitivity increased control behaviors. Control behaviors increased activation. Activation worsened recovery. These examples show why interaction reasoning matters. It prevents chasing the most obvious symptom. It directs attention to the loop that is redistributing load. When you see a loop, you can change the loop. Changing the loop is more effective than changing one symptom. Failure and compensation follow a progression that can be reasoned through. The progression begins with reduced adaptability, then moves to reduced recovery, then moves to reduced reserve. At each stage, the system uses compensation strategies. Those strategies create predictable side effects. Reduced adaptability means the system cannot shift states smoothly. The person feels stuck on or stuck off. They have trouble initiating or trouble stopping. A common compensation strategy here is tightening. The person becomes more controlling, more structured, more rigid. They rely on routines to create stability. Routines can help, but excessive reliance on routines is also a signal. It means the body is replacing regulation with external structure. The side effect is that spontaneity disappears. Small disruptions feel intolerable. Now stress is not only the event, stress is the inability to adapt to the event. Reduced recovery means the system cannot return to baseline after effort. The person can still work, socialize, and train, but the aftercost accumulates. A common compensation strategy here is overdrive. The person pushes through fatigue. They use stimulants. They use urgency. They compress rest. The side effect is volatility. They feel waves of productivity followed by crashes. They feel wired when they should be tired. They feel tired when they should be alert. Reduced reserve means capacity is shrinking across months. The person notices that their baseline has changed. They used to recover in a night. Now they need a weekend. They used to tolerate travel. Now travel destabilizes them for a week. A common compensation strategy here is avoidance. They reduce activities. They narrow life. They protect themselves from overload. Avoidance can be necessary, but it also signals that reserve is low. The side effect is fragility. The person becomes sensitive to small stressors. They develop fear of overexertion because overexertion now has real consequences. A key reasoning move is to identify which stage dominates. If the dominant stage is adaptability, the primary goal is restoring smooth transitions. If the dominant stage is recovery, the primary goal is rebuilding closure and completeness. If the dominant stage is reserve, the primary goal is reducing drain and protecting rebuilding. Mistakes happen when interventions target the wrong stage. For example, forcing activity in a reserve-deficient stage backfires. It may temporarily improve mood, but it increases depletion. Another mistake is over-preservation in an adaptability stage. The person becomes more rigid. They feel safe, but they lose responsiveness. Now stress tolerance declines further. Another mistake is chasing stimulation when recovery is failing. Stimulation increases output, but it also increases activation. Activation prevents closure. Closure is required for recovery. So the strategy that helps during the day worsens the system at night. This is predictable compensation logic. Compensation changes where symptoms appear. Early stages show tension, restlessness, and difficulty transitioning. Middle stages show volatility, sleep disruption, and inconsistent digestion. Late stages show shrinking capacity, sensitivity, and delayed recovery. A person can move from feeling driven to feeling depleted without any single event. The system simply moved down the progression. Intervention must reverse the progression step by step. You do not rebuild reserve by chasing output. You rebuild reserve by restoring recovery first. You do not restore recovery while adaptability is chaotic. You restore adaptability by reducing unnecessary activation and improving closure. The order matters, because each layer depends on the previous layer to stabilize. Ask 3 practical questions. Can the person downshift at night? Can the person bounce back after effort? Is the person's baseline shrinking across months? These questions guide stage-appropriate change. They also prevent the illusion that more discipline is always the answer. Sometimes discipline is the compensation that is draining reserve. Example 1 is the productive person who cannot unwind. They work effectively. They meet deadlines. They keep responsibilities organized, but their body does not switch off. They finish work and immediately reach for stimulation. They scroll. They snack. They drink. They do anything to change state, because the system cannot complete the work cycle on its own. In this pattern, the dominant failure is closure. The system stays open. Sleep becomes the battleground. They get into bed and the mind stays active. They feel tired but not sleepy. They wake early and cannot return to sleep. In the day, they rely on caffeine and urgency. A more useful reading is that downshifting is impaired. So they use external tools to force downshifting. Those tools create more activation later. Now the loop tightens. A stage-appropriate change is to design closure, a fixed endpoint, a decompression ritual, a buffer between work and sleep. The goal is not relaxation as an idea. The goal is cycle completion as a mechanism. When closure improves, sleep quality improves without forcing. When sleep improves, recovery improves. When recovery improves, the need for stimulation declines. Example 2 is the person who trains hard but keeps losing tolerance. They begin with a good routine. They add volume or intensity. They feel strong for a short period. Then recovery begins to lag. They wake less refreshed. They feel tight or wired. They push anyway. In this pattern, the dominant failure is recovery. A common misread is to blame diet first. Food matters, but the core mechanism is incomplete closure after training. Activation runs into the night. Sleep becomes lighter. Buffering declines. Sensitivity rises. Now foods that were tolerated cause discomfort. They think digestion is the primary problem. Digestion is the expression. Recovery is the origin. A stage-appropriate change is to shorten the activation window. Earlier training, longer cool down, less late stimulation, reduced intensity for a period long enough to restore baseline. When recovery is restored, sensitivity decreases. Then dietary tolerance returns. Example 3 is long-term decline with continued forced output. They still work. They still manage responsibilities, but baseline capacity is shrinking. They need longer weekends. Travel destabilizes them for a week. Social events have an after cost they cannot afford. They assume it is age or personality. The key mechanism is reserve loss. Reserve loss often hides behind years of successful compensation. Now forcing does not work. They get sick more often. They get injured more easily. They feel emotionally flat after stress. A common misread is to treat this as motivation failure. They try to restart discipline with big pushes, hard training, productivity hacks, aggressive fasting. This increases drain. In a reserve dominant stage, the first move is reducing leak, simplifying demands, protecting sleep, building gentle, repeatable recovery. Reserve rebuilds slowly. So the metric is consistency over weeks, not intensity in a day. As reserve rebuilds, adaptability returns first. Then recovery improves. Only later does output feel easy again. These examples show trajectories rather than checklists. Each shows a dominant stage, a compensation strategy, a loop, and a stage-appropriate direction of change. When you can track timing, sequence, buffering, availability, distribution, and closure, daily experience becomes readable. You can see why someone is stuck on why they cannot recover, or why baseline is shrinking across months. This converts vague experience into clear system behavior. The next step is to apply the same reasoning to individual functional networks. Start from role rather than label. Start from loop rather than symptom. Ask what the system is doing to maintain continuity. That question leads naturally into focused Zang deep dives, because each deep dive becomes a study of how one regulatory role shapes timing, closure, buffering, and reserve. The same reasoning also prepares the study of circulating substances, because substances are understood by how they are generated, distributed, and conserved within these loops. With this approach, learning stays concrete without becoming memorization, because the viewer can map daily life onto system behavior and time scale.